thousands of civilians died because of Ukrainian shelling. Since the beginning of the special military operation, Ukrainian regime started using actively terroristic methods. They shell residential areas, equip firing positions and ammunition depots in schools, hospitals. They use civilians as a living shield, and they shoot refugees and prisoners of war. There are many more analogies. Let's take Budanovsk, another tragedy. Can we compare them? Yes, we can. Yes, it had another name. It was another region. But the sense is the same. When terrorists were using civilians as living shields openly, this is the same. Just a year ago, we were speaking about this, and people were responding, this is not like that. There is no such practice used by Kiev regime. But now Kiev regime just signed it, just said that they in fact used kindergarten, schools and hospitals for military actions. So they were equipping their positions there. They were shelling these facilities. They did everything not thinking about the consequences for civilians. Remember the story just a year ago when civilians could not leave their houses because they were not let out of there by Ukrainian militants. They had to stay in their apartments, in their houses. But now they have documental evidence how Kiev regime recognizes it. There is a special category of terroristic methods of Kiev for political purposes, like the explosion of ammonia pipeline Taliati Odessa in Kharkiv region on the 5th of June this year. It had a global relevance for food security. It was one of the elements of grain deal or package agreement on the export of agricultural production fertilizers from Russia and grain from Ukraine. Since July 2022, Ukrainian armed units attacked Kakhovska HPP with the Emerald HIMARS. Such methodical shellings resulted, in fact, in that on the 6th of June, the structure collapsed and there was an uncontrolled discharge of water downstream of Dnipro. This resulted in a humanitarian and ecological catastrophe. And this could create difficulties for cooling of the reactors of Zaporizhzhia NPP. We have spoken about this already. Moreover, if now they tell us that this happens because of the special military operation, this is the so-called pseudo-legitimate response of the Kiev regime. Do not believe them, because they did it in 2014, 2015, and during all these 8 years. They were stopping the flow of water or electricity to Crimea. They did everything. Just remember, they spoke about director Sintsov. No one saw what he did. Remember what the West did. They started a campaign that this is an artist and he shouldn't do anything about this, but he was a terrorist, and this happened long ago. If we're speaking about terrorist actions, these are, for instance, 2 attacks on the Crimean Bridge on the 8th of October 2022 and the 17th of July. The automobile part is used only by civilians, and everyone knows very well about this. We're speaking mostly about tourists. Kiev regime knows about this. West knows about this. Civilians died because of this. Terrorist nature of these explosions is obvious, and Kiev regime claimed the responsibility for it cynically and calmly. Remember, they spoke about this very silently. We will do it, but we should not speak about this. This is what Kiev regime said then. And then they are speaking loudly about this. Why? because nothing was implemented of what the West promised. Now they have started to act openly using terrorist methods. Such methods are used against journalists, political and public figures in their country and in Russia. On the 15th of April 2014, former deputy of Verkhovna Rada from Regent's Party, Oleg Kalashnikov, was killed. Next day, on the 16th of April 2015, journalist Les Buzina was killed near his house, and still no one was punished. On the 20th of July 2017, Russian and Ukrainian journalist Pavel Sheremet was killed in his automobile. The 31st of August 2018, a detonation of a pre-placed explosive device killed the head of DPR, Alexander Zakharova. The 20th of August 2022, Daria Dugina, journalist and political scientist, was killed in Moscow. SSU has participated in this. On the 6th of March this year, Konstantin Malafeev was killed. On the 2nd of April this year, Vladlen Tatarsky was killed in St. Petersburg. This explosion was organized by Ukrainian special services. On the 6th of May, writer Zakhar Pelepin was injured in Nizhny Novgorod region. On the 22nd of July, cluster munitions were used to attack a civil automobile with journalists. Military correspondent of RIA Novosti, Rostislav Zhuravlov, was killed. Four of his colleagues were injured. Everything that is done by Kiev regime is the other methods used by international terrorists. Just remember, like UAF were torturing prisoners of war, were shooting them, and they did this using cameras. Isn't this what ISIS does and did when they were making videos of the killings and sending them all over the world? You cannot understand this because only you need to have the logic of terrorists, of those who are investigating the crimes of terrorists. You need to use this to intimidate people, to show your power and use it for your own purposes. This is the logic of terrorists. Lately, Ukrainian authorities started to use terrorist methods even more often. They're creating new ones, and they're using ones that I have mentioned. And this is because of the failure of the counteroffensive of the UAF that is generously sponsored by the US and other NATO countries. And the terror used by Kiev regime is the factor that escalates the crisis and makes it difficult to reach peace. And to conduct terrorist attacks, weapons and are used that are provided by Western allies of Ukraine. And those who sponsor, on those states who sponsor terrorism, and these are Western countries.
They are the ones who sponsor the terrorist activities of the Kiev regime. We have taken note of another anti-Russian attack of the High Commissioner of the United Nations for Human Rights, Mr. Turk. This time he decided to make a statement on the anniversary of the events in Yelenivka, following which a missile strike of the Ukrainian armed forces killed the Ukrainian servicemen who were in the detention center there. We would like to call on the High Commissioner to comply with the principles of objectivity and impartiality, which are the foundation for the mandate that is given to him. The UN official shouldn't assume the role of the so-called prosecutor general on the global scale and give its own evaluation of the activities of sovereign state without any proof and without understanding of what proof means. We're confused by his statement saying that the death of over 50 Ukrainian prisoners of war in the detention center in Yelenivka wasn't caused by a missile launched by the HIMARS system. A question arises. Why is his office, that has no relevant competence in this quite specific area, have such convictions? Did he receive the materials about that? I'd like to take a look at that. I'd like to know who gave that and what the materials contained. His cites and quotes of the victims and their relatives' claims can stand to no criticism, since there was no investigation or expertise by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. In fact, we're only dealing with another empty revelation of the highly likely category. Do you remember we gave the grades? This is one of them. I think it's number 8. At the same time, Volker Turk ignores the official information of the Defense Minister of the Russian Federation and the Investigation Committee of our country, which was communicated to the public. We regret that the High Commissioner once again shows double standards and unwillingness to give an objective evaluation of the activities of the Kiev regime. On the 31st of July, at Russian initiatives, there was a Security Council session on the matter of the systematic use by Ukraine of terrorist methods. The deputy head of the UN Office of Counterterrorism, Rafi Grigoran, and the civil activist Sergei Cholin, who suffered during the terrorist attacks against the journalist Vladimir Tatarski in April this year, were the reporters at the event. The Russian representative at the UN Security Council gave a description and the examples of terrorist activities of the Kiev regime and put the responsibility for it on its Western allies. Apart from that, he noted the role of the UN Secretariat and the role of other international structures who refused to react to the flagrant activities of the Ukrainian regime and resulted in its devolving to terrorist methods. In their turn, the Western states were predictably trying to shift the focus of the discussion towards the so-called Russian aggression. At the same time, a number of the most active supporters of Kiev regime went as far as to directly condone the use of terrorist methods. I gave you the quote from the U.S. Department of State. The representative of the State Department said that the terrorists were free to choose their own targets. Although he doesn't call the Kiev regime terrorists, he just says the Kiev regime. But the methods are terrorist methods. It's no surprise that, feeling their absolute impunity, the political and the military authority of Ukraine is active in organizing new attacks against the military and civilian sites. The Russian Federation will continue to draw the attention of the global community at the UN Security Council and other UN bodies to the grave consequences of the terrorist activities of the Ukrainian regime. And moving on to the same situation, on the 27th of July, we learned of the President Biden's decision to begin providing the ICC with proof of the supposed war crimes of Russia in Ukraine. Therefore, we're witnessing a cardinal change of approach of the Americans in their coordination and interaction with the pseudo court in The Hague. Let me remind you of the history of the matter. This is quite interesting. For many years, the United States of America, by recalling their signature under the Roman Statute, kept ignoring the ICC. They refused to interact with the structure in any way, and they blocked its investigation, and they even introduced personal sanctions against the prosecutors of the ICC. Washington was afraid that the ICC investigation would reveal unattractive facts for the United States, and the international community would learn of the true crimes that were committed by the NATO servicemen, for example in Afghanistan, as well as in Iraq and other parts of the world where the alliance was known for its military interventions and the bloody crimes. The current US administration seems to be convinced that by creating a negative background against Russia and its authorities through its pocket international structures, the US would force the world to forget about their own numerous war crimes. By the way, here's an interesting fact. Such warming in the relations between Washington and the ICC coincides with the beginning of the mandate of the new prosecutor of the ICC. He's a British subject, Mr. Karim Ahmad Khan. One of his first decisions was to deprioritize the investigation of the US crimes in Afghanistan. Here's your answer. We're well aware of the special relationship between London and Washington, and all the principles of this special relationship are seen here. And Karim Khan has avoided the US sanctions. And now it moves on further. The US decision once again shows that Washington isn't even trying to keep up the appearances. I'm not even talking about the internal US legislation. This is about international law. They openly disregarding everything. They're openly committing crime, although they're not even trying to talk about their own country. Instead, they are trying to shift the focus to others. They continue their blatant violations and their flagrant activities, and no one's telling them they can't do that. Our attitude towards the activities of the ICC, including towards the Ukraine, is well known. The total devaluation of this body is direct evidence of its readiness to indulge to the Western sponsors by ignoring international law and the interests of the conflict settlement. And I should also take note of the recent statement by the head of the British intelligence service, Richard Moore, the head of MI6, in the British embassy in Prague. It's been a long time since we saw such a degree of anti-Russian sentiment. He gave an analysis of the situation in Ukraine, and as head of the secret operations of London abroad, was once again using the same phrases about the so-called Russian aggression and the need to continue providing all assistance to the Ukrainian armed forces, and he never denied the involvement of the intelligence agencies of his country, of Britain, to the terrorist attacks committed against Russia, especially on the Kerch Bridge. And he noted that Ukrainian had the right to self-defense, and the West had warned about that, and the West had to help them in that. The fact that we're dealing with civilian infrastructure was not of his concern. We're also taking note of Richard Moore's words that London was going to drive a wedge in the relations between Russia and the African countries, as well as Iran and China. As shown by the Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg, such provocational attempts by the Brits have no chances for success, but they will keep doing that and forgetting any norms of decency or even the gentleman code. Mr. Moore called on the Russians to betray their own motherland and cooperate with the British intelligence. I'd like to say that that's an interesting thought. I suppose that we need to take a mirror approach. Such calls should be addressed to the British subjects and the citizens of other countries of the NATO axis of evil, by, to quote Moore, offering them to cooperate with the intelligence service. What do you think about that? I think it's a great thought to offer the British subjects, many of whom are quite pressed for money, to work with Russia and the Russian intelligence. Why not? What's wrong about that? From London's point of view, that's the norm. I can't see any reason why we should deny such an opportunity. London's anti-Russian sentiment has been long apparent. Now their arrogance and the brazen attitudes of the head of the British spy agency goes beyond all the possible borders. In general, he is shooting himself in the foot. Previously, they seemed smarter. All of this resembles the methods of the Goebbels propaganda. This anti-Russian sentiment and even nationalist sentiment, these are all the same tools. During World War II, the Nazis were offering the Soviet and the British citizens to cooperate, to collaborate. They said that their motherland didn't like them, but Germany could offer them something. The West only starts showing a different attitude for our citizens when the blitzkrieg fails. They inevitably proceed to plan B and offer them to collaborate. There are some things that we don't condone, but there are some things that we can respond to. So, wait for that. And don't come crying that we're meddling into the internal affairs of Britain. This is only a mirror response. We've taken note of And by the way, let me say a few words on the topic that is of great concern for many. We are getting many questions on the situation in Niger. We are continuing to monitor the situation in the friendly state of the Republic of Niger, where on the 26th of July a group of servicemen removed the President Mohamed Bazoum from power, and they declared the establishment of the National Council for the Protection of the Motherland, which is tasked with managing and controlling the country at this phase. We share the concerns expressed on this occasion by the UN Secretary General, as well as the African Union and the Economic Community of West African States, and we believe it is quite important to avoid further degradation of the situation in the country. We believe it is necessary to urgently organize national dialogue in order to restore civilian peace and ensure statehood and law. As a positive factor, we take note of the peaceful scenario of the events, and there are no victims, and the current crisis in Niger takes place amid the complicated situation in the area of security and the grave situation in the social and economic sphere for the population. In finding ways to solve the crisis in Niger, we follow the same formula of African solutions for African problems, and we hope that all the necessary intermediate efforts will be taken in order to settle the crisis through the African Union and the sub-regional organization. At the same time, we believe that the threat of the use of force against a sovereign state will not contribute to the de-escalation and settlement of the situation in the country. We hope that the people of Niger, with whom we have long traditions of friendship and cooperation, will manage to overcome the current complicated period of its history, and we're aimed at further development of the entire spectrum of the mutually beneficial bilateral links between our countries. The European Union. We have taken note of the statement of the official representative of the European Commission, Mr. Stano, regarding the amendments to the federal law on the non-commercial organizations, as well as the amendments to the legal, illegal, procedural, and administrative code of our country. In particular, they are talking about the involvement of the Russian legal and physical persons in the activities of the foreign NGOs. According to the EU, these amendments go against the Russian constitution and seriously limit the rights and freedoms of the citizens. Moreover, so they make deep conclusions that the amendments are meant to isolate the people of Russia from the rest of the world. Mr. Stano, are you serious? I've had enough of that. Let's start with saying that the collective West is not the rest of the world. This is the minority in all the indicators. No one gave him the right to speak in the name of the whole world. Brussels doesn't have that right, not because there is no such right, but because, apart from other factors, the EU has morally discredited itself. They cannot take their own decisions, and this puts an end to any serious role of this group in international affairs. It's high time that the European Union rejected its neo-colonial activities and attitudes. The second point, we live in Russia. This is our country, these are our laws and our constitution. We can figure it out ourselves without Mr. Stano, without Brussels bureaucracy. We can decide how to live ourselves and what to do, and what problems we should deal with. We can do that, we know how to do that, and when we need any advice, we would definitely ask for that, but so far I can only see that it's Brussels that needs such advice. They're in quite a bad situation now. This nervous reaction of the Euro Commission is understandable. The Russian amendments are narrowing down the opportunities for the EU to affect the political situation in Russia. And this is exactly the reason, rather than the imagined limitations of the laws of the Russian citizens that are so protected by the West, are cause for concern by the European Union. And another important point. Currently, the European Union, the European Commission, through Mr. Stano, are talking and saying that supposedly our amendments are limiting the rights of our citizens for certain activities, and they are meant to isolate the people of Russia from the rest of the world. I'm sorry, but Does Mr. Stano know about the package of sanctions, the dozens of sanctions packages introduced by the EU that directly limit the rights of the Russian people to communicate with the European Union? Perhaps Mr. Stano doesn't know that the decisions of the European Union have blocked any chances of civilian air transportation. This was a hit on all the citizens of our continent, those who live in Western Europe and those who live in Central Europe and our country. This was a hit on the people from other regions of the world who were using these transit routes to come to Europe. Mr. Stano seems to ignore the fact that the sanctions that were collectively developed and used by the West, by the European Union or the United States together or separately, are blocking any money transfers, the use of bank cards. They limit the right for transportation by any means. Mr. Stano doesn't seem to know that for many years, long before 2022, the European Union was simply bullying and mocking common sense. They were manipulating the negotiation process on visa-free travel and on the other visa amendments, and now they're using the visa regime as a political tool. And by the way, this is banned and prohibited by the documents that were signed by the countries of the European Union. How could Mr. Stano not know that? I think he didn't know about the great number of restrictions on trade, development of communications, the humanitarian contacts that was seen by the European Union and introduced by the European Union against our country and other countries and regions of the world as well, where the European Union has something to destroy. But in this case, we're talking about a great number of restrictions, and after all of that, Mr. Stano is speaking in the name of the European Commission, and he found some amendment in our law that could supposedly isolate our people from the European Union in particular. And that's insanity. The foreign NGOs can work with Russian citizens. For that, they need to register their branch or office in Russia. There is no isolation here. This is a simple story that exists in all the countries. Sure, difficulties can arise. At the same time, if they don't want to work transparently and openly and they have their own hidden agenda, they will have difficulties. If they use the great deal of financement, including financement from the states and groups of states who are not friendly towards Russia. That's true.
Yes, this will be difficult. Those NGOs who are violating everything in our country, we are trying to get rid of them. This is true. We want to ask European Union not to interfere into the internal affairs. The representative of the European Commission does not bother about the absurdity of this declaration. They themselves started the process of the so-called package to protect democracy, to fight the interference into European democratic processes. The EU Brussels is presenting a directive on common standards of transparency and accountability for interest service providers whose activities are coordinated or financed from outside the EU. The relevant European NGO called Eurofara. It is an analogy of American law about foreign agents. There is American law, FARA. So the task is the next. I'll tell you about this. To create a firmest EU control over the interest service providers and impede any attempts of their secret promotion. You have your own problems and you have your own tasks concerning democracy that you were trying to impose on everyone for many years. In this context, the critics of rulemaking of the third countries that is directed to streamline the work of foreign NGOs looks foolish, said by the representative of the EU. In the context of the Ukraine, in the context of the very hot phase of the context, we would like to speak about the document of the OSCE on small arms and light weapons and the principles governing conventional arms transfers. There are documents on which the strategic stability is based. I've heard about questions from experts. I hear questions at press conferences when we can expect when the US and Russia will again at a new level concern the issues about the limitation of weapons. Let's see what happens from the side of the US, the West, collective West, in reality. To remove any questions about the future, pumping Kiev neo-Nazis with weapons, the Westerners condone the violations of human rights and escalate armed conflict and participate in military crimes of the UAF against civilians on both sides of the front. They have their own commitments in OSCE. In the context of the OSCE, everything they do contradicts their commitments. In these conditions, the trend of this year was a massive non-provision of the states of collective West about information about the export of small arms and light weapons in 2022. From 57 countries of the OSCE, their commitment on the document on small arms and light weapons, only 26 fulfilled their commitments, and only 7 openly recognized that they provide weapons to Kiev neo-Nazis. It is very interesting that there are no main sponsor of Ukraine, including the US, Britain, and France. As for the Ukrainians themselves, they didn't provide any information about the import of small arms and light weapons. We see attempts to cover the facts about the arms transfers to the armed conflict. We've already spoken about the corruption between the Washington and Kiev. If you expect statistics, if you expect data that will be provided to OSCE, well, then we can compare the facts, and no one wants that. The Kiev regime and Washington wants to fight the corruption of the Kiev regime only in words, but they, in fact, want to participate. This way, they'll have an opportunity to influence political elite and use Ukraine as a tool. That is why they created corruption here. They spread corruption there. The military products are provided to Kiev massively by the participants of the OSCE, and that is why it is even more difficult to cover theft, resale, and illicit trafficking of weapons. We don't know where these weapons are provided by compassionate Western alliance weapons. Czech and Belgian rifles could be a threat to innocent people in any part of the world, but NATO and EU countries are consistently ignoring the threat of such weapons ending up in the hands of national radical and terrorists in Ukraine and in other countries. Further provision of weapons and munition to Kiev will not result in a breakthrough on the battlefield, but will prolong the conflict, debilitate European economies, and have a greater damage for defense capability of state participants of the OSCE. And let's return to the first thesis on this topic. Who can we talk to? Who can we negotiate on sensitive issues relating security that fooling around about the commitments to the global community, to their own allies, not even to us? Several words about Japan. We got to know about many publications in the media of China and Japan They were speaking that in Tokyo they find an archived document with new facts about structure and activity of the so-called Unit 731 of the Japanese Kwantung Army that dedicated to horrible tests of bacteriological weapons on people during the Second World War. They were always saying that there is nothing like that, but it is. It is a 1940 report of the head of this unit to the leadership of the country, and it adds to the testimony of Japanese crimes in the context of Khabarovsk process of 1949. It was stressed many times that the legal actions on this case, as well as the International Military Tribunal on the Far East of 1946-48 are continuing. That is why we want to receive this material. We asked a copy from our Chinese colleagues. According to the information, they already have it. This event, again, makes us remind official Tokyo about the necessity to recognize fully their responsibility for aggression of 1930-1940s, including the intervention in Manchuria in 1931-32, its occupation in 1933, Nanjing massacre, armed provocation in Hassan Lake on Halkingol River in 1938-1939, and my grandfather participated in those battles, and many others. Now Tokyo has not just to remember but to analyze, and they are doing just the opposite. They're forgetting it. The administration of Fumio Kishida should stop this revanchist rhetoric and to stop condoning ultra-right nationalists just before the anniversary when the USSR entered the battle against militarist Japan on the 9th of August 1945. Well, with such a baggage, you should always ask for forgiveness from everyone. I'm speaking about Tokyo right now, and not to organize some actions like that. And we know that these actions are being organized and who organizes them, and that a Japanese government has to do with them. These are actions against our diplomatic missions. Decade after decade, in Tokyo, our diplomatic missions are being, there are actions before our diplomatic missions with the buses for 24 hours every day. They scream mottos and and then they tell us about democracy. They should ask for forgiveness and analyze and never commit the same things in the future. That is what they do and what they should use their resources for, because this is how civilized people act. I would like to say that the Red Army, by the opinion of our and foreign historians, made their decisive contribution to end the war and to save the millions of lives of common Japanese that lived in the country. If we take nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, if we do not take them, there will be more lives saved, and we will always remind about this. The more buses before our diplomatic missions, the more often we will remind about this. We again say that South Kuril Islands are an integral part of Russian Federation after the Second World War. This is a fact that has no doubt, so any protest of Tokyo will be considered as an attempt to interfere into internal affairs and to violate fundamental principles of the UN Charter. On the 5th of August of 1963 in Moscow, the USSR, the US and the UK signed treaty banning nuclear weapon tests in the atmosphere, in outer space and underwater, the so-called Moscow Treaty. It was an important step to stop nuclear arms race. It was the first international legal tool to create limitations for nuclear tests in three types of environment, creating a solid basis for further prohibition. In those times, the US and UK could seriously work on eliminating threats to humanity and to fulfill their obligations. The Moscow Treaty is still in force. There was hope for the end of nuclear tests on the 24th of September 1996, where the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty was open for signing. Unfortunately, it was 25 years since that. It was supposed to become the next milestone after the Moscow Treaty, but it still hasn't entered into force. What is the cause? I think the answer is obvious. A destructive and irresponsible attitude of the U.S. In 2018, they officially refused to ratify the treaty, and they continue to have this position. We think that this choice of American authorities is that means that they don't have any political will, and they're unable to negotiate and to fulfill their international legal commitments in the sphere of non-proliferation and arms control. We call on the U.S. that aspire to have authority in the sphere of arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation to rethink their ideas and their false attitude to CTBT, and to show responsibility and makes a step in the right direction to ratify this treaty, rejecting the temptation to renew nuclear tests under this or that pretext. On the 9th of August, International Day of the World Indigenous Peoples is being celebrated all over the world. We attract attention to the origins of traditional culture, rising interest and respect to the customs. And it is especially important in the context of geopolitical changes. In our country, since ancient times, around 200 nationalities live in peace and harmony. They speak 270 languages. 47 of them are indigenous minorities. Russian legislation determines such peoples as the objects of legal protection, bearers of collective individual rights. Unique diversity of customs, tradition, and languages is our invaluable heritage that we protect and develop. The necessity for sustainable economic, social, and cultural development of indigenous minorities, protection of their original environment, traditional way of life, rights, and interests is hard to overestimate. That is why it is priority for Russian Federation and the key of consolidating our society in the face of new challenges. And I'm ready to answer your questions. Международная жизнь, international life, are you here? Yes, we're here. Hello. Please tell how foreign ministry, what does the foreign minister think about the declaration of the Prime Minister of Armenia, Pashinyan, on the 25th of July, that the activity of Russia has gone down, if we're speaking about Armenia and Azerbaijan, because it is occupied with the Ukraine. And what about the peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh? Can they leave it? Well, this logic is hardly to understand. Before 2022, everything was normal from the point of view of the Armenian leadership. Let's see the facts. I think that all this talk about the special military operation and that some directions of the foreign policy are not so important for Moscow, there are no evidence of that. These are ideas, personal opinion, maybe emotions. We should see the facts. We are fully interested in promoting the process of normalizing relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We do everything to reach solid peace and harmony in the region. It also concerns South Caucasus and our other commitments. How can we speak about the less activity in the recent months there are several contacts with the participation of Russia and the highest and high levels? So let's just see the key ones. A trilateral meeting on the 5th of May, the meeting of the Trilateral Working Group on deblocking of transport communication with the co-presiding Vice Prime Minister of Russia, Azerbaijan, Armenia on the 2nd of June, and negotiations of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs in Moscow on the 19th of May and 5th of July. These are just 3 months. I think now we should see the truth. Now, Baku and Yerevan have to implement the reached agreements, and we are ready to help them in every way. This is the priority. The implementation of what was agreed upon. We do not understand the logic about the possible decision of Russian peacekeepers to leave Nagorno-Karabakh, knowing about the very difficult humanitarian situation. Maybe this is what Mr. Pashinyan wants. He wants this to happen. It is known that the functions of Russian peacekeepers are very important. They exchange prisoners, they demine the territory, they help to solve problems and provide humanitarian help. Does Armenia really think that this is not necessary? They have to know what they want. It happens very often when the leadership of Armenia have a very controversial position on some key issues. So, as for this issue, we don't want any controversy, because this will not lead to anything good. And the contribution of the Russian peacekeeping contingent is very important to the security of the region in the zone of its deployment. That is why any attempts to create any doubt raises many questions. Armenia recognized Nagorno-Karabakh as a part of Azerbaijan. Any claims to Russia on the lack of activity is something inadmissible. Thank you.
Is Komsomolskaya Pravda with us? Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. I have the following question. At the end of last week, you said that there are talks with a number of African countries to open Russian embassies there. Are you training new personnel to work there, or are you going to send the diplomats who had to leave the EU and the United States? As of today, we have agreements to open embassies of the Russian Federation in several countries of Africa, with whom we already have diplomatic relations. We had established them a long time ago. To work in the new embassies, first of all, we will be seeking the relevant country specialists, who are plenty in the Russian Foreign Ministry, and they have already proven themselves as specialists in this regard. Speaking of the personnel of the Russian missions, for example, in Europe, that have been closed down, there is an internal program in our ministry. They get employed in accordance with their qualification, professional training, and language knowledge. This goes for the employees of the central office and the Russian foreign missions. Everything goes on a case-by-case basis, but still we have a systematic approach for each individual diplomat. We have various parameters of their employment, and all of that is defined in accordance with the program. But you must understand that there is a document containing that program. I would also like to point out that, speaking of your question regarding the specific plans to open embassies and the countries and when it's going to happen, we will share this information as soon as the negotiation process with our partners is over, and as soon as we can do that. Do we have the CJTN, the Chinese Media Corporation, with us? Yes, we're always with you. Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. We have only one question. The U.S. State Department has confirmed the beginning of the talks on the guarantees of security for Ukraine this week, as declared by the head of the press service of the United States State Department, Matthew Miller. They will be talking about long-term guarantees for providing Kyiv with assistance in the area of security, which are not linked with the current shipments of weaponry. At the same time, previously, the head of the Ukrainian office of the President, Andriy Yermak, said that the guarantees would be active before the country joins NATO. What is the meaning of such guarantees of security for Ukraine, and what is the Russian opinion on such activity by Washington? Thank you. You know, these are all just words and wordplay, and the only goal and the sole purpose of that is finding the good political wording, but the essence remains the same. They're going to use Ukraine as a tool for anti-Russian hybrid war, and the war that was unleashed by the West. The second point and the second goal is to preserve this Ukrainian territory as the platform for their weaponry and a platform to implement the goal that I mentioned previously. Washington has always been complying with the function of the general staff of the hybrid war of the collective West against Russia, and Washington spares no effort of itself and no spare of the Europeans, and it spares no military loss of the Ukrainians. They do everything they can in order to make sure that our neighboring country remains a source of threats for Russia as long as possible. In the last 1.5 years, the Americans have spent over $43 billion for military aid to Ukraine. The Kiev regime was hoping to get a signal for the prospects of NATO membership during the summit, but that wasn't even an expectation. That was nothing but Zelensky hysteria and a mass-scale PR campaign at the level of blackmail. But it is obvious that there is no consensus about that among the bloc members, and by the way, for very different reasons. Perhaps in the political sense and in the political community, they would like to underline the consolidation of the community, and following the meeting, the Biden administration has tried to find the right wording and in this way to encourage the Kiev regime with promises of seeking certain security guarantees, and therefore to motivate them to continue the hostilities. But the goal is obvious, and I've already mentioned that. Let me remind you of our position that has been shared many times. The full-scale political settlement of the Ukrainian conflict requires the neutral status of Ukraine, and any attempts to get the country involved with NATO and any attempts to give the guarantees of security or to make up any wording that would equal to that, and everything that can be equal to NATO membership, would significantly complicate the situation around the Ukrainian crisis and would only result in uncontrolled consequences for the security in Europe and all over the world. I believe that this is now understood by everyone. It's important to remember that for the US, Ukraine is, first of all, a tool for achieving its own political goals, and sooner or later Washington will have to accept the new geopolitical reality, and it would have to say goodbye to its claim to hegemony. The process would be complicated and hard for them, since they are exceptional, but that's inevitable. Thank you. Is the Moscow Post with us? Yes. Hello. We have 3 questions today. The first one, what's Russian position on the demands of Azerbaijan to get the 7 enclaves of Azerbaijan to the country? We are aware of the Baku position on that, and there are similar claims against Azerbaijan. We believe that the matters of the territorial claims should be solved within the process of the delimitation and demarcation of the Armenia Azerbaijan border, and it is coordinated by the relevant bilateral commission, and we welcome the fact that on the 12th of June, following a long break, there was a 4th session, and Russia stands ready to provide consultative and expert and documentary support in solving all the most complicated issues. Thank you. Now the next question. Does your ministry take part in the work to repatriate the Russian servicemen who are currently prisoners in Ukraine? First of all, the Defense Ministry of our country and the Commissioner for Human Rights of our country, Madam Tatiana Maskalkova, were working on that. If necessary, the Russian Foreign Ministry gets involved in this process, but the main volume of work is carried out by the 2 aforementioned bodies. And the last question, the final one, let me get back to the question on Mr. Askar Kubanishbek. Member of Parliament Maria Butina in her Telegram channel said that she had sent a request to the Foreign Ministry. Kirill Kabanov, the member of the Human Rights Council of the Russian President, reported in his channel that he would address the Russian Foreign Ministry and Interior Ministry with his colleague, asking to provide the Russian passport in the Bishkek detention center and demand that the Kyrgyz authority release him and give him to Russia. Do you have any news on that? Yes, I can say that we have received a request and we are working on that. Thank you. Let's move on. Is the Anna Delu with us? Yes, hello. Ms. Zakharova, we have two questions today. The first on the Green Deal. Last Thursday, the UN Secretary General said that a small bunch of donation cannot substitute the entire volume of grain that was safely and securely transported through the Black Sea under the conditions of the deal. Could you comment on that? You know, this is quite a strange statement for the General Secretary or the Secretary General of the organization involved with global affairs. He said, a small pile of donations. First of all, we should ask the recipients what they think about this small amount of donations and what they wanted. Perhaps they should have a word. Perhaps you should ask them first before you go to the cameras as a Secretary General and make such statements. Ask the countries themselves. Perhaps this is quite important for them. I remember when we had an audience with a great number of African delegations, and I remember them applauding when the Russian president said that we had the intention to send humanitarian assistance and provide the countries in need that we stated with the Russian food supplies. I remember very well how the countries reacted to that. I think he should be more careful with his words when we're talking about humanitarian activities carried out by one country regarding another country or other countries on a cost-free basis with an open heart and a goodwill. That's the first point. We need to keep it in mind. Such a high post as the UN Secretary General obliges him to certain standards. And the second point is there will be some people, sure, this is not my position, but hypothetically there may be some people who could distort that phrase to mean something absolutely different. For example, saying that a small pile of the UN Secretariat employees cannot fix the grave consequences of the destruction of the international legal system, for example. This opens opportunities and opens the doors for very dangerous rhetoric. We see that the efforts that have been taken in accordance with the mandate and in accordance with the powers and the goodwill could be met with such unpleasant reactions, to put it mildly. I think he should avoid such words. Everyone should avoid that. And here's another point. It seems that all of these grain deals, or the Black Sea Initiative as it's officially known, all of that was elaborated due to Russia's inability to provide its grain, supposedly, that we had promised, but for some reason we couldn't implement that. We couldn't comply with our obligations, but that's not true. And I think the UN Secretary General knows perfectly well that there would be no problems with the shipments, there'd be no problem with the sales or the free transfer of our food if it weren't for the illegitimate sanctions by the West, which had completely intended to block everything related to our country with no regard for the needs of the global community. And I believe that these pathos, these high-flown words by the UN Secretary General should be addressed to the countries who elaborate new packages of illegitimate sanctions every month with no regard to the direct and indirect consequences of such activities. And I believe that this small pile words should be used regarding the Western countries. For example, a small bunch of Western countries has created the situation for the dramatic end of the grain deal. And before that, a small bunch of Western countries created the preconditions for the dramatic consequences which have a destructive effect on the global food security. In this case, the words about a small bunch fit perfectly, and I believe that this is a function of the UN Secretariat to draw the attention to the countries that are destroying the global economy, who are using the legitimate sanctions. They should point out the destructiveness of their activities for the global organization and for the world in general. Speaking of the food security situation, it is not threatened by the activities of our country. Our country stands ready to sell, to transfer, to donate humanitarian assistance. We can donate food and fertilizers. Our position hasn't changed at all. Nothing has changed. Everything that currently threatens the global food security is linked with the activities of the collective West. This is their irresponsible policy in the area of food, environment, energy, resources, their endless meddling when they're either buying out or manipulating the markets. They disregard the basic economic indicators, and in some countries they have crisis and recession and so on. This is a perfect opportunity for the UN Secretary General to proceed to a deeper analysis of the consequences, and he should use this word where it fits. Thank you very much. And I have a second question. Is Moscow expecting to get an invitation to the upcoming meeting on the Ukrainian peace formula by Saudi Arabia, and are you planning to monitor the developments regarding this meeting? We have already made a comment recently on this matter, and I must say that, first of all, we continue our contacts with various countries which offer peace initiatives. Secondly, the meetings initiated by the Kiev regime and its Western curators to promote the Zelensky formula is a lie. This is deceit. These are not any practical or scientific conferences. These are not diplomatic meetings to elaborate any political decisions. This is an attempt to use the sincere intentions of a number of states to strengthen their anti-Russian coalition. If we go further through this topic, this is just a bait. A bait for all the countries who are sincerely concerned and are actually eager to settle the situation and want to avoid even bigger consequences. I mean, the consequences of the conflict around Ukraine. They're trying to use the Zelensky formula, supposedly to elaborate certain peace initiatives for the settlement. But in reality, this is a lie. This is a staged meeting under the pretext of talking with those who are concerned. They are actually trying to build up an anti-Russian coalition and to show the pseudo-unity of the world regarding the unacceptance of the Russian activities. Why am I saying this like that? The Zelensky formula has nothing to do with peace. The Russian Federation has once again reiterated that we do not accept this so-called Zelensky formula. This doesn't work for us and will not work. So there is no point to discuss it and to believe that Russia would be involved in any way. There's no point getting involved for Russia. Such meetings that take place under the aegis of the Zelensky formula are an attempt of the Zelensky regime to monopolize the right for peace initiatives. You may have seen the arrogant reaction of the Kiev regime to the peace initiatives offered by the intermediaries or even by the third parties, the concerned parties and political elites They don't need anyone. They only want to dominate themselves. I mean, the Kiev regime and its initiative. They want to degrade the importance of the intermediary proposals and humanitarian offers from other countries. They believe originally that the Zelensky formula contains certain aspects that would never work. You may remember the Western formula. The Western formula says that they should fight till the end without any peace talks. They need no peace negotiations. They've blocked that. And the Kiev regime has prohibited itself from organizing any talks like that, because there is no peace agenda on the table. The goal of the West is to kill as many Russians as possible, as said by former President Bush, by Senator Graham and many others. The goal of the Kiev regime is to kill as many citizens in Ukraine. That's what they're doing. That's why they created the Zelensky formula, which has nothing to do with reality and has no chance of approval, and they keep pushing it all over the world, and they reject everything offered by the intermediary countries. This pseudo-peace plan of the Kiev regime, let me repeat that, has nothing to do with peace, and it only contains the unacceptable ultimatums and demands for our country, which we cannot and will not comply with. The authors understand that perfectly well, and just using this as a cover-up to justify the continued hostilities by the Kiev regime and to receive even more material assistance have we managed to mention today. This is nothing but corruption. But if such meetings help the West realize the stalemate and the dead end of the Zelensky plan, perhaps that would be useful. Thank you. Thanks to you. Let's move on. Is the news.ru with us? Yes, news.ru, we're here. Good afternoon. I have the first question. Is there any chance for Moscow contacts with the new leadership of Niger against the controversial situation? On one hand, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has condemned the attempt to seize power in Niger and said that constitutional order should be restored. On the other hand, the African country has pro-Russian rallies, and the media report that there are various mottos and slogans: Hail Russia, Long Live Putin, and Down with France. What do you mean by possible contacts? I mean any establishment of relations and dialogue. Today and even before that, we have expressed our sincere interest in, first of all, in stopping the development of the situation in the country, and secondly, we said that we supported national dialogue and the restoration of peace and law and order. These are the priorities. In our view, these are the first steps that should be taken. At the same time, we have taken note of a certain positive dynamic. These are the most important aspects, and the rest will move on as soon as the situation gets back into order and when peace is restored. Okay, thank you.
And the last question for today: how Russia is going to solve the scandal between Armenia and Azerbaijan when the convoy was sent and for Armenians and Karabakh, and it was not agreement with Azerbaijan. And Russian peacekeepers are being accused of lack of activity. As you said, the sending of this convoy was not agreed upon, but Russian peacekeepers tried to find solutions, and they had constant contacts with both parties. That is why any accusations towards Russian peacekeepers are counterproductive. They do not reflect the contribution of our peacekeepers to the situation on the ground. We have contacts, and I think that they will have results. Thank you. Compact TV, are you here from Germany? Yes, hello, Ms. Zakharova. I have two questions. The first, some time ago in Berlin, a trophy Russian tank was placed before the embassy of Russia. Do you want to place trophy weapons between Western embassies in Moscow? For instance, Leopard tank before Germany embassy, or for instance, armed personnel carriers before the France embassy, and what trophy weapons would you place before the Polish embassy? As for the destroyed weapons and equipment and its demonstration before the embassies should be asked of the Ministry of Defense from the Moscow government. They make decisions about this. We have heard about a discussion on this, even would say the willingness to implement this. I think the foreign ministry can support, has the right to support such will of the population, and we used our right. We supported this initiative, and I speak about this publicly. But as for its implementation, it should be implemented by the Minister of Defense and Moscow authorities. Because what West countries allow themselves to do, presenting Russian tanks of those times that should be sacred, and they use them for mocking, and they did this twice. They did this to mock our ancestors, to mock the actual current tragic situation is unacceptable, and people should be punished for that. And this is not because of revenge or because of our right to have a mirror response. Before that, we used different methods. We acted friendly because we wanted to live in another way, not in a savage way that collective West proposes. But there are things that should not be just let be. It's not the issue of the feeling of dominance or maybe a sarcastic attitude, nothing like that. It's the same as putting people in the atmosphere they have put other people into, to make them understand, but they will not be able to do it fully because we're speaking about modern equipment and weapons. The only thing that I can say that is something personal, I think that if such action is organized, why do it only in Moscow? We have general consulates and missions of these unfriendly countries in other cities. But this is an issue to those who will organize it. As for the equipment that will be placed, actually, I don't think about this. This is not a question to me. I'm not an expert in equipment. This is a question to those who will implement this. Thank you. And the next question. Everything was said already and was already published. It's a question about the Russia-Africa summit. German media say that it was a failure because not all the presidents arrived. We would like to use the opportunity to ask you what were the best results of the summit, because we in Germany present the information without any censorship. Well, I think that NATO summit was a failure if we're speaking about failures. Everyone came to that summit, but why and how it ended? It was a scandal. It was a demonstration of lack of understanding among everyone who was there. It presented to all the world the dictator and the monster that the West created, and that they even didn't include in their ranks. He didn't, and he can just not talk with all those people who were there. It was a real failure. But as for the Russia-Africa summit, it was a success. It was a such scale that NATO cannot even imagine. Yes, I understand that today's summits are organized behind the closed doors, and then we see the press conference. But Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg was not like a traditional summit. It was an innovation summit. I think this is a real summit of future, because it had the high-level meetings combined with the exhibition of what the agreements were signed about. And before the Expo Center, there was an exposition. And if Western journalists could write the truth, they would tell the people about the organization. But let's see the figures, the facts. You were right. A lot has been said, but maybe we should repeat it. Well, I will provide statistics once again. Official delegation of 48 countries participated in it. 27 countries were represented at the level of the first and second figures. So 5 biggest integrational associations of the continent were represented. 2 plenary sessions were organized. The participants declared their commitment to create a new, more just, multipolar architecture of the world on the basis of sovereign equality of states and mutually beneficial cooperation. This is the most important idea for the modern world, because unfortunately now this idea doesn't sound anywhere else. Before that, we heard it from international organizations, the UN system, but now even the UN doesn't use such words as justice, speaking about the world order. They speak rarely about the truth, sovereign equality of state in practice. But this summit reincarnated all of these things and showed how many states and regional structures only in Russia and Africa are committed to that. And if we combine it to the all global South states, will receive the majority in the world. 5 key documents were adopted. I will not name all of them. 4 declaration and a plan of action in the form of partnership Russia-Africa for the 3 future years. 2 documents with the leading African integrational associations were signed. A memorandum of understanding between the government of the Russian Federation and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development on the basis of mutual relations and cooperation, and memorandum of understanding between the government of the Russian Federation and the Economic Community of Central African States on the basis of mutual relations and cooperation. 9,000 participants, representatives of media, 2,000 media representatives, journalists. There were not only representatives of Russia and African continent, there were representatives of other continents. 100 representatives of foreign business, more than 200,000 representatives of Russian business, 1,100 representatives of foreign official delegations, There were 59 panel sessions with the participation of 457 speakers. There were four main directions: the economy of the new world, cooperation in the sphere of science and technology, humanitarian and social sphere, together to new quality of life, comprehensive security and sovereign development. There was also a media forum. 161 agreement was signed. I will just name them. There was a World Youth program, a film festival, cultural program. There was a food project. It was a real form of the future, as it should be, without separation to jungle and beautiful gardens, without segregation to any groups, without naming this or that country or more democratical or not. The aim was peaceful development, justice, and non-acceptance of any forms of colonialism, imperialism, race discrimination. The true sovereignty and respect were the purpose on the basis of the international law and the UN Charter. Thank you. Tverskaya 13, are you here? Yes. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. We have one question. In Batumi on the 31st of July, a Story Grande, a liner with Russian tourists, was there, and there was an action against the Russians on the territory of Georgia. The buses with tourists were egged, and there were mottos pronounced against Russian citizens. Is there any constructive solution to this problem? Well, first of all, we need to understand what is this before analyzing something additional. What is it? It was something ordered. It was an action that was ordered by someone else, and such actions are being implemented in the context of Russia, in the context of other internal actions, and there are many of such facts, and we know who orders that. Those who commit such actions do not represent the majority of the population. They represent those who ordered and organized it. You see the evidence, you see the praise of this provocation by the representatives of radical Georgian opposition as well as Western countries. You've seen the declaration of the ambassador of the US in Tbilisi, Kelly Degnan. She directly lectures the residents of Georgia how to live and how to praise such actions. With her declaration, she shows who benefits from it. Inside the country, this provocation was not supported. We receive many requests from Georgian citizens that say that this was a provocation and it was unacceptable. As a country, they have nothing to do with it. We always receive such messages. Just remember what happened when air connection was restored. If you want to use this connection, use it, because if you wanted to use this connection before, you wanted to use third countries to reach Georgia. And now we have an opportunity for a direct connection between Georgia and Russia. Many public figures asked why the citizens of Georgia are not being asked why the decision is made for them. Why can we travel through third countries, but we cannot travel directly, which is more beneficial for people? We should think about the budget, and people should think more about the money they have than before. This is a provocation. If people did it from heart, they would think about their loved ones. They would think about the money that Russian tourism provides, and what opportunities Russian market provides. They would think about their relatives, their friends that are connected by history with two countries, that are connected by families, by relatives. This is it. It's a classic provocation that was paid by someone else. Thank you. Thank you. Virelk, are you here? Hello, Ms. Zakharova. Please do not ask questions that I have already answered. I have three questions. The first is about the detention in the Lachinsk corridor on the checkpoint as a citizen of Artsakh that was transferred by ICRC and Russian peacekeepers. He was detained by Russian forces, and the Baku introduced him into the list who ICRC was going to transfer. What is done to him? And one more person was detained. He was detained by Azerbaijani party. What will be done for these people? Everything happened makes it even more difficult to find necessary solutions and compromise. This situation is becoming more tense. We have seen diametrically opposed evaluations of Armenia and Azerbaijan. If we do not take this case or take some other cases, it is important to reach normalization of the relation between Armenia and Azerbaijan and to ensure rights and security of Karabakh population. Russia wants to have negotiations in Yevlakh with the representatives of Azerbaijan. Would like to know how negotiation in Azerbaijan is possible with the citizens of Artsakh. What will be the guarantee of self-security if Azerbaijan violates grossly its commitments before the international structures and does not pay attention to the actions of peacekeepers of Russian Federation? Why not help negotiations in third parties? Well, I understand that journalists that are on different parties on the conflict. I'm speaking about different types of conflicts in the different phases, hot or cold phases. They have a dilemma. They can be impartial or take some kind of a position. And there is no going away from this dilemma, because we understand the situation is very difficult. But without impartiality, there is no journalism. Yes, civil position is unconditional. There is also an individual evaluation, but journalism means that people should be impartial. We need to understand that such phrases that look like mottos, that they will not help. They will only create new questions and new provocations. That is why I please ask you, and not only you, but everyone, if you ask questions, please be impartial and objective, and don't make it like a declaration, but like a question.
Yes, but I'm describing the situation of the fact the person has been detained. I didn't add anything here. I did not make up what Svartsakh said. I think you're such an experienced journalist that you're well aware of what I'm talking about. Now, let me move on to the answer. But without the introductory part, my answer wouldn't be full. We support the launch of the talks between Baku and Stepanakert. This topic is on the agenda, and our contacts with the relevant parties. The Russian peacekeepers had previously assisted in organizing meetings between the two delegations and will stand ready to continue providing all the necessary assistance to the process. Russia does not launch any preliminary conditions, and we keep working on rapprochement between the parties, which are seriously different amid the escalation in Nagorno-Karabakh. Speaking of the recent cases that you mentioned in the first question, as I said, unfortunately, they have a negative effect on the overall complicated situation. And a final third question, Maria Vladimirovna. Hunger is becoming to Nagorno-Karabakh. People are ready to take the most radical steps. What is being done to unblock the situation and to ensure the supplies and shipments to avoid a humanitarian catastrophe? We see that there are public and non-public calls from Baku, and what are you doing for that? We are working with the parties, and even though you say that public calls do not work, we once again reaffirm our readiness to unblock the Lachin corridor and to ensure the necessary conditions for the life of the local population. Much depends on the political will and the readiness to find compromise. And in this case, we can de-escalate, and for that we work with the parties. Thank you. Thank you. Is the voice of the fatherland with us? Hello. We have 3 questions. The first one. Vladimir Putin said that Russia and Africa are united by their inherent desire to support their true sovereignty. If the president speaks of certain true sovereignty, does this mean that we in Russia face the same problems in sovereignty as the countries of Africa? As we know, international bodies like the IMF do not consider us as developed countries. And essentially the West, just like with the African countries, is trying to turn us into a raw material colony. The answer is yes and no. I can't say that we're faced with similar problems. I could say that we have different experiences, but one doesn't contradict the other. It goes all together and complements the statement by the Russian president. Let me explain. We have different experience in history. The countries of Africa and the continent in general used to be a colony for the countries that we call the West now. Previously they were called the metropolis. They were ruling everything in the African continent, from resources to the lives of the people. And later they were forced to leave the continent during the decolonization process. And in doing so they created so many problems for the future of the African people that many of them are still bleeding. We don't have such experience in our history. We've never been someone's colony. And at the same time, I've always emphasized that it is important to remind ourselves now we've never been colonizers. At the same time, in this situation, we have a common understanding and a common vision that is rooted deep in our past. Despite our different experiences, we have the same view, and we believe that it is unacceptable to revive the colonial system, to revive imperialism, to revive and reincarnate in any way and in any updated form of such things as racial discrimination or any form of discrimination by nationality or skin color, geography, language, or even the shape of your skull. That's unacceptable, and in this sense our experience is similar. The eras were different, that is true. That was several centuries of colonialism and domination of Africa by the metropolis. They were faced with racial discrimination. It wasn't even called discrimination. Essentially, that was slavery. Our experience is related to the 20th century, when they were either trying to enslave us in the 20th century or to destroy us if enslavement wouldn't give the necessary results. I am talking about the Nazi regime, fascists. Their view was based on the same segregation of people, albeit on different principles. Here you have skin color, in our case we have your ethnic origin, or the region of your country and so on. And these are common points for us. And even though our experience is different but similar at the same time, it all shows that it is unacceptable to segregate people by any principle. It is unacceptable to dominate anyone, to enslave anyone. We have a common path. We have all gone through the decolonization process. There would be no decolonization without the Soviet Union. This isn't only about the fight against the fight of these countries against the colonizers. Our support also meant helping these countries after obtaining independence. You must understand that after being colonies for many centuries and upon getting independence, it was very easy to lose due to the factors that I mentioned, due to the great number of problems created by the colonizers that left Africa. The problems were caused by the poverty that they themselves provoked. The problems were related to the political youth of these countries. It was only thanks to the support of a strong and reliable friend. I'm not even calling this partner, a friend. This was a guarantee for them to retain their independence, a guarantee that they would not lose their independence and that we would continue moving along this path. This is what the Soviet Union did for the African continent, and all of this together explains the similarity of our views of true sovereignty, to quote President Putin. Thank you. Now the next question. President Putin also said that the brains of millions of people are being washed by the representatives of the fourth power of the media. What did the president mean exactly? And did the foreign ministry experience such problems when the information was deliberately distorted within Russia? Yes, we did, and we live in that, and that's what the president was talking about. The real events are distorted by the mass media of the Western mainstream to a point when reality is impossible to learn, and the perception of the distorted reality is addressed to the audiences of the Western countries and the audiences of the countries where Western mainstream media broadcast or where they have direct agreements to exchange information packages. And they are shaping the reality by affecting the audiences. This is a closed circle. We live in that. We have the anti-fake section on the website of the ministry, and we will publish our text there. Every day we publish reviews that debunk a great number of articles of such disinformative nature. There is a great number of videos that contain openly anti-Russian sentiment. And this didn't start in 2022 or 2014. Previously, they simply didn't provide any positive news from Russia. They didn't say anything about Russia at all. They either reported on something related to crime or corruption or something ridiculous. They would never report on any construction work, on sports, on culture, on humanitarian activities or education, or the science and technology, just the ordinary lives of people. Nothing was reported at all in the media. That's how it started, and then they moved on and began adding the hidden and then open anti-Russian sentiment. I have another question on the situation within Russia. Is your information distorted by the media within Russia? Yes, it happens too. And if you take a look at the anti-fake section on our website, you will see information on the Russian media as well. And those who used to be considered Russian were registered in Russia, but then they turned out to be foreign agents. It happens too. Even if they're not foreign agents, they can also distort information. It happens. You must see the difference between a fake and brainwashing. Mistakes can happen. Everyone makes that, all the media. And not just them, not just the state media. And the state authorities in their public activities are all prone to mistakes. Given the modern volumes of information and the scale of information, this has become routine. There's one difference between a mistake and a fake. A mistake can be amended. You can apologize for a mistake and admit it, but a fake is something you deliberately make, regardless of the debunkment. This is an intentional use of unverified information, of fake information that you know about. Everyone does that. By everyone, I mean that in the West it has become routine, but here, unfortunately, we also have that. Thank you. And now, would it be useful for the mass media, including us, the Voice of the Fatherland, to organize broadcast in foreign languages in order to provide the truth to the Western viewers about Russia? And if yes, how would it be better to do? Yes, sure. There are different approaches. Some write in foreign languages, some translate, some use machine translation, some invite native speakers as authors. It can be done differently depending on your capacity. Thank you. Thanks to you. Do we have any more questions? If you do not have any more questions, I say my goodbyes. Until next briefing. All the best. Goodbye.